Chapter 15. Job Qualifications. When it comes to job qualifications, there really isn't a standard guideline that all trucking companies adhere to. Some companies will hire almost anyone with a CDL, while others are extremely picky. Either way, you shouldn't worry too much about finding a driving job. My father-in-law was already in his 60s when he considered getting a job as a truck driver. However, he was convinced that no one would be interested in hiring an old fart. His words, not mine. I call him much worse, but only to his face. Now don't be offended. He always strikes back with something like, "I always hoped my daughter would marry someone I didn't like so she could torture him for a change." That wish certainly came true. Despite his fears, when he went to driving school, he was pursued by numerous recruiters and had his choice of companies, all with no experience and being an old fart to boot. As I mentioned earlier, many of the large carriers are actually targeting the old farts now. Here are some driver qualifications to consider. Minimum age requirements, physical expectations, commercial driver's license and endorsements, Department of Transportation or DOT physical and drug screen, traffic violations, accident record, experience and work history, criminal record. Let's cover each topic more closely now. Minimum age requirement. Fortunately, there's a minimum age requirement to drive a truck. Can you imagine someone with the attention span of a 16-year-old driving a big rig? That's scarier than Richard Simmons on a no-dose binge. Federal law states that the minimum age to drive a tractor-trailer across state lines is 21 years old. However, if you're doing local work that's confined to your state, the minimum age is 18. Now, I'm no Nobel Prize winner, but does this make a lick of sense? We're going to trust an 18-year-old to drive around all the tight corners in our cities and local back roads, but they're not mature enough to handle the open road where they'll eventually get to other cities with tight corners and back roads? Now, I know it's cliche, but I'm going to use the old argument that if a person is old enough to join the military and fight and or die for our country, I think we could possibly trust them to drive a truck across state lines. Heck, it's not nuclear physics. Besides, I'm quite certain it takes more concentration to avoid taking a bullet in the keister. Physical expectations. Most companies will have a list of minimum physical expectations that are required to do the job. When it becomes time to job hunt, you can find most of this information by either talking to a recruiter by phone or by visiting their website. If you go to their website, you may have to start an online application to get to the qualifications section. Once you get there, you can back out after you've found what you're looking for. Probably the best way is just to call a recruiter and ask. Here are a couple of examples of some common physical expectations. If a particular company pulls flatbed trailers, that's a trailer with no walls, you could be required to put a tarp over the load if the weather gets nasty. Their guidelines might say something like, must be able to climb 15 feet onto a trailer in inclement weather. If you can't do that for some reason, make sure you don't apply to that flatbed carrier. Most carriers state that you must be able to unload a full trailer when required. The wording will say something like, must be able to carry 50 pounds for a distance of 53 feet numerous times. 53 feet is the length of most trailers. This particular one is quite common among all the carriers. Now, men won't fret about this stipulation much, but women sometimes do. My advice to women is not to worry about it. The evil overlord probably couldn't lift 50 pounds over her head if her life were at stake. Furthermore, if it were my life at stake, lifting a paperclip above her kneecaps would be a complete impossibility. I'll never truly know how strong she is, because as her hunk of burning stud, it's my job to lift stuff for her. And why not, when you got guns like me? Psst. The point is, she drove for 9 years being a weakling, and so can you. CDL and endorsements. The acronym CDL stands for Commercial Driver's License. There are many levels of CDL depending on the type of vehicle you intend to drive. If you want to drive a big rig tractor-trailer setup, you must possess a Class A CDL. However, if your plan is to drive a concrete truck or a local delivery truck with no trailer, you may get by with a Class B or C, depending on what your state calls it. Sounds confusing. It's not. Just call your local DMV, or Department of Motor Vehicles, and ask them what type of license you need for the type of truck you're interested in driving. Yes, all this does mean that you'll have to pass another written and driving test. Now, if you're anything like me, you were as nervous as a preacher with Tourette syndrome when it came to passing the driver's test as a 16-year-old.
Holy shnikes! Now I gotta parallel park a 70-foot vehicle?
Don't sweat it. That's what driving schools are for. Besides, you won't have to parallel park an 18-wheeler. You will have to be able to back one to pass the driving test, but seriously, don't worry about it. Your driving school instructors will help you determine what licenses and endorsements you need and teach you the skills you'll need to pass both the written and driving tests. If you have a regular driver's license, you may already be familiar with endorsements. Endorsements are just add-ons that expand on your license to drive a vehicle. For instance, you may have taken a test to get a motorcycle endorsement so you could zoom around on a crotch rocket or cruise the boulevard on a hog. Some endorsements, like the motorcycle one, require a driving test along with a written test. Others will only require a written test. Some endorsements are required to drive a commercial vehicle. Some companies require a hazmat or hazardous materials endorsement. Others don't. There are other endorsements that qualify you to drive a bus, pull double or triple trailers, or tankers, just to name a few. A few words about the hazmat endorsement here. The words hazardous material are scary to the average person. Don't let them frighten you. According to the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, there are approximately 3.5 million qualified hazmat drivers on the road already. If you haul for a company that specializes in a particular hazardous material, such as gasoline or propane, you'll be receiving specialized training from the company for the specific hazardous material you'll be hauling. More commonly, the general commodity carriers that you'll likely wind up working for need to have you get hazmat certified so you can haul everyday household goods, such as paint and hairspray. While you may haul something more dangerous now and then, the point is, don't let the scary words hazardous materials frighten you away. Unless you're a terrorist, of course. In that case, do us all a favor and be frightened away. Even better, why don't you just cram a shotgun muzzle in your mouth and pull the trigger? That's a much better option. Let me know if you need to borrow a trigger finger. You probably won't be hauling much hazmat anyway, and as I said before, some companies won't even require you to be certified. On the other hand, I've worked for companies that don't require it, but they will pay extra if you have the endorsement, even if you aren't hauling it at the time. So it can't hurt to go ahead and get certified if you can pass the background check and you can afford it.
The background check?
Yep. Although a hazmat endorsement isn't that difficult to obtain, it isn't as easy as it was before 9/11. That fateful day changed all that. You now have to go through a background check and fingerprinting before getting your certification. To renew the endorsement, a driver will be required to have another background check every 5 years. Check out the TSA website for more information about getting a background check, or you can call the Driver Service Center at 1-877-429-7746, and there'll be a link to that TSA website in the appendix of the text version. Here are the major requirements. You must be a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. Disqualifications include felony drug possession, unlawful weapons possession, violent felonies such as murder, rape, or sexual assault, or any violation of transportation security in the past 7 years. You must submit to a background check, and you must get fingerprinted. The driver is responsible for the fees incurred in fingerprinting, background check, and any renewal costs. At the time of this recording, the fee for the fingerprinting and background check is $86.50. If I were you, I'd go ahead and get as many endorsements as you can afford when you get your license. The only exception might be the passenger vehicle one. Because it requires you to do a driving test in a bus, only bother with that one if you're open to being a bus driver. Other than that, though, you never know what job opportunities await, and you wouldn't want to miss out on a great job just because that particular company couldn't wait for you to pass a particular endorsement test. And as I said before, I made an extra penny per mile for having my hazmat endorsement, even though I rarely haul hazmat loads. That's about $1,200 extra per year. The endorsements, including hazmat, are mostly written tests, and your driving school will guide you through them before they put you behind the wheel. Trust me, if some of the morons in my driving school class, myself included, pass those tests, you shouldn't have a problem. Unless, of course, you're dumber than the average moron. DOT physical and drug screen. Every year or two, you'll be required to pass a Department of Transportation or DOT physical. This, again, is federal law. Your initial physical is usually completed during orientation. There's more on orientation in Chapter 18. When it's time to renew your medical card, your company will either send you to an approved clinic or they'll let you go to your own doctor. This physical should be less than $100, and your company may or may not reimburse you for all or part of that cost. Think you won't pass the physical because you're out of shape? So are many truckers, but they're still driving. It's just a basic physical like you had when you tried out for the basketball team in junior high. Touch your toes, walk in a straight line, sight test and color blindness test with or without correctional lenses, hearing test, blood pressure, pulse, breathe in and out, and the ever so wonderful turn your head and cough test. Ladies, if the doctor is a male and tries to do the cough test on you, you may want to backhand him. On the other hand, some of the shy men out there need to be aware that it may turn out to be a woman doctor that'll be handling your junk. For specific DOT physical standards, go to the FMCSA website. There's a link to that in the appendix. And if you want to see the medical exam forms that your doctor will be using to judge your health, I've included another link where you can download those medical exam forms. Many drivers take medications for what ails them. The trucking company will tell you which ones are safe and which ones aren't. Just get them approved before you get too far into the hiring process. If you want to check before you invest any more time and energy into your possible career change, you could always find a local doctor that gives DOT physicals and ask them if your particular medications would keep you from driving. I should mention here that not just any old doctor can give DOT physicals anymore. The FMCSA recently changed the rules so that a doctor now needs to be listed on the National Registry of Certified Medical Examiners. There's a link in the text version to a locator where you can find one. Like I said, just be sure to let your company know ahead of time what medications you take so you won't become a story like this one. One day as I was fueling at the Flying J in Winnemucca, Nevada, I was approached by a man who claimed he drove for the same company I did. I was instantly skeptical. Being a trucker himself, he had anticipated my disbelief. You may remember that truckers have heard every line in the book, from people begging for money or trying to hitch a ride. He whipped out his company fuel card to prove it and asked for a lift. I said, "What happened to your truck?" He told me that the company had somehow discovered that he was taking a particular heart medicine that they didn't approve. Since he didn't report it ahead of time, they fired him on the spot, told him to leave his truck at the truck stop and find a way home. Now, I'm not entirely sure that this story was true. Usually in a situation like that, a good company, which this was, would help him get a bus ticket home if he didn't have the money, and they'd take the bus fare out of his final paycheck. Since he had that fuel card, I know he worked for the same company, but he may have made up the sob story because he had lost his cool, quit, and left the truck stranded somewhere. It happens. But when that happens, the driver's on his own. On the other hand, if his story were true, it wouldn't surprise me either. The company's truck insurance probably wouldn't have covered him, forcing him to find another way home. Either way, the point is, he was hitching a ride home, and I was heading in the opposite direction. He still had his thumb out when I left the parking lot. Do you want to risk it? Get your medications approved in advance. You'll also be required to pass the old piss in the cup test. Isn't that enough of a test in itself, trying to whiz in a cup without getting it all over your hand? As for the ladies, that's just nigh impossible, isn't it? Still, they wouldn't want to hire a heroin addict, now would they? Like the DOT physical, the drug screen will likely be done during orientation at your new job. It's mandatory for you to pass both tests before a company can even offer you a job. In addition to your initial drug test, most companies will do random drug testing once you're hired. One day you'll be driving along and your boss will tell you to take your load to a particular terminal or yard. Now, taking a trailer to a yard is a common occurrence, so you won't have a clue what's coming. As soon as you get there, you're directed to go to the office or a nearby lab to whiz in a cup. They won't give you long to get there either. They don't want to give you any extra time to run by the local herbal store. You potheads know what I mean by that. Also, if you have a traffic accident of any kind, you may be asked to head to a lab for a drug test as soon as you're released from the scene of the accident. Trucking companies with deep pockets are targets for lawsuits, and a clean drug test is their form of CYA. So the message is clear. Drug users need not apply. Traffic violations. Your company will want to know how many traffic violations you've got in a specified period of time, usually 5 years or less. The time period is entirely up to the individual company. If you're unsure of your driving record, you can have your local DMV, that's Department of Motor Vehicles, print out an MVR, that's a motor vehicle report, for a few bucks. Trucking companies aren't too concerned with your 15 parking tickets. They primarily want to know the incriminating stuff, such as reckless or careless driving, driving while intoxicated, leaving the scene of an accident, excessive speed, that's driving 16 miles per hour over the posted speed limit, and if your license has ever been suspended or revoked. Again, the period of time will vary, generally between 2 to 5 years, but you'll need to report any of these violations you've obtained in the specified time frame. No more than 3 moving violations in the previous 3 years is a fairly common requirement. Don't try to hide anything, as they'll be running your MVR too. If you forget to list a speeding ticket on your application, they'll probably just let you update your file. But they might find it a wee bit hard to swallow that you accidentally forgot about that DUI you got last year, no matter how drunk you were at the time. Now, don't think you can't get hired just because you've had a DUI in your past. That's driving under the influence. I'm one of you. Well, sort of. Mine happened in July of 1992. I think. I was pretty ripped at the time. Anyway, I got lucky that I went to high school with the officer who arrested me. On the downside, while still in high school, his girlfriend had decided to break up with him and copped out by telling him it was because of me. He didn't care much for that, even if it wasn't true. As he was cuffing me, according to policy, he said, I was hoping he had either forgiven or forgotten that which I wasn't guilty of in the first place. He must have at least forgiven me because he let me stew a while before giving me the breathalyzer test. It resulted in what was called a BAC, or blood alcohol content, which at the time was considered a misdemeanor offense instead of the felony offense that a DUI now carries. However, since it involved alcohol in the operation of a motor vehicle, nearly every trucking company I applied to considered my BAC to be the same as a DUI. But as you can tell, it didn't keep me from getting hired. As I said, that happened in July of 1992. I got hired at my first driving job in July of 1997, so it had been 5 years since I got nailed. It's true that I had fewer options than my squeaky clean spouse. Translation, never got caught. But there were still plenty of options. A few companies won't hire you if you've ever had a DUI in your life. Now that's just silly to me, as we've all done stupid stuff of which we're not especially proud. Like that tattoo of the Grand Canyon strategically positioned across your buttocks. That DUI night of mine was a doozy. Some companies will hold a DUI against you for 10 years. A more standard time frame is 5 years, but I've seen some as short as 3 years. Even if it was 20 years ago, they'll probably want to know all about it. As I said, it won't keep you from getting the job, so there's no need to hide it. So don't let a stupid mistake from your youth control your future if trucking turns out to be something you're interested in. Unless, of course, you're still getting wasted and driving on a regular basis. In that case, get off the stinking road for all our sakes. Get some help, you lush. Accident record. If you've totaled every vehicle you've ever owned, please consider another career. My life sucks at times, but I still value it. We all know someone who shouldn't even be driving a Ford Escort, let alone an 80,000-pound weapon of mass destruction. If you're one of these people, you probably already know it because you're the butt of every driving joke within your circle of friends. Thankfully, you'd probably rather snip off the end of your pinky finger with a set of wire cutters than drive something as massive as an 18-wheeler. On behalf of all of us on the road, Thank you. Thank you very much. For the rest of you, a perfect driving record isn't necessary. Again, different companies have different guidelines. Most will want to know about any accidents you've had in the past 5 years or so. They'll want specific information such as date and location of the accident and the dollar amount of the damage. So contact your insurance company before you head to orientation if you don't know all the details. Most trucking companies aren't only concerned with how many accidents you've had. They're also interested in whether your accidents were preventable or non-preventable. Examples? Glad you asked. You didn't? Well, humor me then. It's good for my ego. Besides, one of them is quite funny. At least it is in hindsight. Sure wasn't then. At least to me it wasn't. Here's my one non-preventable scenario. 3 lanes of traffic in Kansas City evening rush hour, and I'm in the hammer lane. That's the far left. A mom and her young daughter in a Saturn were driving beside me in the center lane. Mom decided to merge into the far right lane, which just so happened to be occupied by another vehicle. She noticed this at the last second and swerved hard left to get back into her lane. The little car fishtailed and turned right into my path. I ran straight over the hood with my front right tire. It scared the holy hell out of me. I can't imagine how she must have felt with that massive grill bearing down on her. I would have had to change my Fruit of the Looms. Thank God everyone was okay. There was hardly any damage to my truck, but it annihilated the front end of that Saturn. The state trooper said that it's a non-preventable accident for me, and so it was. In other words, I did nothing wrong, and there was no way I could have avoided the collision. No harm, no foul. Now this preventable, non-preventable thing can get a bit absurd. Case in point, I have 2, count 'em, 2 preventable accidents, both on the same day. Think you've had bad days? Listen to this. Okay, now I'm pulling a set of doubles along I-225 around Denver. That's Colorado for you geographically challenged folks, where I'm scheduled to deliver shortly. I blow an air lane to my trailer and the brakes on the rear trailer lock up. I drag the locked up trailer, screeching smoking tires and all, to the side of the road and call my company's road service department. I know it won't be a long wait because we have a company terminal right there in Denver. I'm so lucky. The mechanic arrives and fixes it in less than 30 minutes. So far, so good. But wait. I called the company and they informed me that this incident is considered a preventable accident.
What? How can an airline bursting while driving in a straight line be your fault?
It's not, they tell me, but it's still considered a preventable accident. Here's where it gets screwy. You see, I was pulling a set of doubles, which are 2 small trailers connected by a contraption with one axle called a dolly. Both trailers and the dolly were owned by a retail store, not the company I drive for. The airline that broke was on the dolly, which again is not owned by my trucking company. Here's the way it was explained to me, and believe me, I insisted on an explanation. Since the person who fixed the trailer didn't work for the retail store, it's considered a preventable accident. Had they been our trailers and our dolly and fixed by our guy, it would have been considered a non-preventable accident. If an employee of the retail store had done the repairs, it would also be considered a non-preventable accident. So basically, it boils down to this. If a company has to pay anything out of their pocket to another company for a claim, that incident is considered to be a preventable accident, no matter whose fault it is. Yeah, I know, that sucks. So I was getting royally ripped through no fault of my own. The moral of the story is that once I explained this particular preventable accident to any prospective employer, they took it into consideration and basically acted like it never existed. They weren't going to hold a $50 claim that wasn't my fault against me. So be sure to explain the circumstances if you think it may make you look bad. I'll have to admit, the second preventable accident that day was my fault. Granted, I was as pissed off as the evil overlord when she walks into a room in the midst of a nephew-uncle fart fest. I was running late due to the airline bursting. I had 2 delivery stops, 1 for each trailer. I had completed the first delivery and stopped in the front parking lot on the way out to grab some quick grub at the Chick-fil-A. I ran in, grabbed some food, and ran back out of the truck. I pulled away and crunch. I had parked too close to a huge light pole and leveled it as I turned too sharp to leave the parking lot. I couldn't believe it. The evil overlord lived up to her name as the crashing sound shot her straight up in bed like the little girl in The Exorcist. Apparently, everyone in a 2-state radius had heard it because someone reported it to the store manager and he came out. Luckily, he was extremely cool. The evil overlord hopped out of the truck and couldn't contain her laughter as she whipped out the camera and started snapping pictures of the glorious destruction in my scowling beet-red face. I was not amused. Amidst her camera-happy insanity, I heard her say,
"These are gonna look great in our scrapbook."
I guess the store manager heard her too, because he joined in the evil overlord's hysteria. You know, I take it back. He wasn't cool at all. Be sure to check out the text version if you want to see pictures of the glorious destruction. Just keep in mind, I was not driving for the company you can see on the trailers. I've blurred out the name of the company that I actually worked for. To sum up, knowing the difference between a preventable and a non-preventable accident can be confusing. In driving school, we were told this scenario and asked if it would be considered preventable or non-preventable. You give it a try. Pay attention, there may be a quiz afterward. Say you're coming up on a red traffic light at a busy intersection. Just as you start to slow down, the light changes to green and you proceed. Suddenly, to your left, you see a car that isn't slowing down. You hit the brakes, but it's too late. The car ran the red light and hit your truck. As for your part, is it preventable or non-preventable? This is where the Jeopardy music would be playing if it weren't copyrighted. Be sure to answer in the form of a question. Now, everyone in my class agreed that since the other guy ran the red light, the truck driver would be cited with a non-preventable accident. What do you think? If you agreed with this, you'd be wrong. You, the super trucker, would be charged with a preventable accident.
Say what?
Yeah, our sentiments exactly. What you've got to remember is that when they're determining whether an accident was preventable or non-preventable, they're not trying to determine who's at fault. They're simply trying to figure out if the accident could have been avoided. In this case, it was clearly the automobile's fault because it ran a red light. Certainly, your green light meant that you had the right of way, but having a green light isn't enough. Everyone knows that you're supposed to check both ways before you enter an intersection. What most drivers don't think about is that this also applies to traffic lights. Because the trucker didn't look both ways and entered the intersection when someone was coming, that accident could have, supposedly, been avoided.
That's insane.
Yeah, we thought so too. We argued with the instructor about it forever, but lost in the end. This is just one of the many weird things in the world of preventable and non-preventable accidents. It may not make much sense sometimes. Because you're considered a professional, you're held to a higher standard. Heck, it seems downright unfair at times. Such is life, and such is trucking. As with your traffic violations, each company will specify a certain number of years for which they want you to report any accidents, both preventable and non-preventable. Yes, this includes accidents in your personal vehicle, as it's likely that you've never driven a truck before. They'll probably also ask you for a dollar figure of damages in each accident. If you don't know the details, you may want to find out from your auto insurance company before you start applying for jobs. Your prospective employer will also pull a DAC report on you to verify the information you provide. Your DAC report will list information such as past work history, traffic violations, accidents, and God knows what else. I've heard it described as a credit report for truckers.
What does DAC stand for?
It stands for Drive a Check. Yes, I agree. It's a stupid name. I'll bet you didn't even know such a report existed, though, did you? Well, that's probably because they're kind of like the CIA of trucking. They know all your vital information, but you can't find out squat about them. I didn't list a website because, quite frankly, I've been unable to locate an official DAC site. Spooky. I did find an article on thetruckersreport.com that sheds a little light on these elusive buggers. That article does list a company called HireRight where you can request a free copy of your DAC report. You can do an online request there, or you can call them at 1-800-381 0645. And there are links to Hire Right and the truckersreport.com article in the appendix. An accident involving a human fatality is a whole different ballgame. If you've ever been in an accident that involved human fatalities, you'll need to explain this thoroughly on your application. The hiring company may want to talk to you personally to get even more information. I can't imagine why they might find that so important. Can you? Experience and work history. As with any job application, you'll be expected to provide information on all employers you have worked for in the past. The period of time can range from 3 to 10 years, so get ready to dig into your memory bank. It's highly unlikely as a new driver that you'd have any driving experience, but if you do, certainly list it. I didn't have a CDL when I worked at the egg packing plant, but I was responsible for backing the trailers into the docks. Most companies like that because it showed I had experience backing a big rig. Backing is generally recognized as a problem area for new drivers. It's also one of the most common types of accidents among experienced drivers. Still, I'm the exception here, not the rule. Don't worry if the most driving experience you have is that vacation road trip you took to Wally World. Hey, there's my second vacation reference. Most people who just start out in trucking don't have any experience driving a truck. The evil overlord certainly didn't. Trust me here when I tell you that you're not alone. If a company's going to hire you straight out of trucking school, you won't be the only rookie in your orientation class. In fact, you may be hiring on with the same company that runs the trucking school you attended. More on how to get your trucking school paid for in Chapter 17. Criminal record. A criminal record is your biggest blockade to a trucking career. If you've got a few misdemeanors on your record, it won't keep you from finding a job in trucking. After all, haven't we all been arrested for indecent exposure before? No? Well, me neither. But having a felony on your record is a different story. Felonies will greatly limit your choices in the trucking industry. The evil overlord had a driving school classmate that had a felony conviction. He even did some time in the Hoosgow for it. For what, we were afraid to ask. Apparently it wasn't too bad because despite his criminal record, he got a driving job immediately after graduation. He just couldn't be as picky as the rest of us students. A DUI is considered a felony. Without a doubt, it's the most common felony that trucking companies deal with. As I've said before, a DUI won't keep you from getting a job, but it will limit your choices. One reason is that some trucking companies require you to be able to drive into Canada, and Canada won't allow anyone with a felony to cross their border. Now, just because a company's information packet or website says you must be able to travel into Canada doesn't necessarily mean they won't make exceptions. As you may recall, my driving under the influence was considered a BAC, or blood alcohol content, which was only a misdemeanor offense. The first company I worked for wasn't sure if Canada would let me cross the border since it was an incident involving alcohol in a vehicle, but it wasn't considered a felony. They agreed to hire me with the understanding that I would begin the process of obtaining a special permit that would allow me, or any felon, to go to Canada. I've included a link where you can find more information on this permit. The process was a major pain in the sitter. I never got the permit, and the company didn't push the issue, probably because I never was asked to go to Canada. Later on, I applied for a U.S. passport and was approved, which allowed me to cruise into Canada anytime I wanted. So a felony won't keep you from getting a driving job, but if you don't obtain that special permit, it will keep you out of Canada, and that'll limit your options even further. Just know that not every company requires all of its drivers to go to Canada. Also, passports are expensive, so if you're felony free, know that you can get into Canada by proving your U.S. citizenship with a photo ID and a birth certificate. However, if you can afford a passport, it sure speeds up the border crossing process. Do you qualify to be hired? To most of you, the answer will be yes. Keep in mind, not every trucking company hires students straight out of driving school. You probably won't know which companies you qualify for until you see each company's requirements. If you want to get a look at a specific company's qualifications, a good place to start is their website. Many carriers' websites list all of their guidelines right there for you. Take a gander. Are you still here? I guess you meet all the requirements and decided that trucking might be right for you. So if you choose to continue on in this endeavor, how do you know that anyone will want to hire you? They will.